Hope you all are doing well. Happy Pride, first of all. Also, happy early Juneteenth. Thank you so much for joining us today for Agency, Autonomy, and Affirmation, Empowering Cultural Self-Determination in Trans and Queer BIPOC Communities. My name is Jamie Sharp, and I am the Program Manager here at GIA. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a light-skinned Black femme. I have really fun clay earrings in today and a lime green shirt, and I have shoulder-length natural curly hair. GIA is headquartered on the unceded land of the Lenape and Wappinger peoples. We ask you to join in acknowledging the Lenape and Wappinger communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Now, before we begin, I just have a couple of housekeeping rules. So please take a minute to review the Zoom features so that you have an optimal experience with us today. If you have a question for our tech team during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function and message our lovely technician, Ali, which their name is under LGC Tech. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for the presenters. If you would like your experience today to include live captioning, select the closed caption or CC feature in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen and select Show Subtitles. According to the 2021 tracking report published by Funders for LGBTQ Issues, quote, 78.4 million, 31% of overall LGBTQ funding was allocated to LGBTQ communities of color broadly. However, LGBT Data and Demographics at the Williams Institute stated that 42% of the LGBT community identify as people of color. Despite reporting more racial diversity than the general US population, trans and queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are challenged with disproportionate inequities, such as higher rates of unemployment and housing insecurity. Through this conversation, presenters will share how cultural self-determination is a path for racial, gender, and economic justice. Today, we have with us J.H.D. Goodridge from Black Trans Fund, J. Mace III from the Black Trans Prayer Book, Omni Romero from Pride Foundation, and Morgan Mo Willis from Third Wave Fund, who will explore the intricate intersections of queer liberation and racial equity and unveil actionable strategies for funders to uplift TQBIPOC artists and creatives. This webinar will feature a panel discussion with our speakers today, followed by an audience Q&A. Please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature even as we're having our conversation, but we'll get to questions at the end. And before I turn it over to our speakers for them to introduce themselves, Jay Mace has a poetic offering for the group today. So Jay Mace, please, I pass it to you.
Good morning, everyone, / afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is J. Mace III. I use he, him as pronouns. I'm a light-skinned Black trans mass person. I'm wearing a Black blazer, silver jewelry, and invisible tattoos. And I want to spit a poem with y'all. And to do that poem, we're going to do this poem together. And the way we're going to do this together is I want y'all to blow up this chat. And so I want y'all to use this chat function since we can't all come off mute. And let's get into it. Y'all ready for a poem? Let me know in the chat if you're ready for a poem. Listen. All right. Okay. So when I say story time, y'all say story time, story time, story time, story time. When I say true story, y'all say true story, true story. So the other day, I dreamt I was cuddling with a human-sized platypus. I stroked its beak and its tail. I wrapped my arms around it, and it made a sound I did not recognize. But that sound felt a lot like joy and calm and loyalty. I hear that's what some people call love. And maybe I didn't know what love sounded like until that moment, but that's not surprising to me because survivors are like that. We're used to mistaking chaos for love. We've been trained to call our very realities things that they are not. So this clarity in my spirit was new. I woke up all rejuvenated and wanted to know everything about the love of my dreams. So I read every encyclopedia entry, every Wikipedia article, listened to every TED Talk I could find about the platypus, but they all described it the same way. said that it was weird and strange that it had the bill of a duck and the tail of a beaver. But how strange that sounds to the platypus that you could be saying it has the tail of a creature it's never even shared the same continent with. It's like if it has the bill of a platypus and the tail of a platypus and poison spurs in its feet like a platypus, it's probably not a duck. It's like calling it a thing it is not. It's like when colonizers that called themselves scientists landed on what was once a Black continent we now call Australia. You know, when they first saw the platypus, they thought it was a joke, that someone was playing a trick. They thought someone actually wasted their day gluing bills onto the faces of rats. So they tried to remove the bill from the face of the platypus and actually ended up killing a lot of platypuses that way, trying to uncover the joke. Turns out the joke was murder because they were insistent on calling a thing it was not. It's like maybe my gender is a platypus. You know, folks always insisted on labeling parts of my body things that they are not. It's sort of like when Columbus landed in Hispaniola and Balboa landed in North America and Hawkins landed in West Africa. And they saw all these Black and brown bodies. They saw men and women, and they saw something else they thought was a joke. Someone playing a trick. They saw all these people that lay between their understandings of gender and sometimes somehow even beyond them. You know, at the time, some called us healers. Some called us just purely divine. Now some of us just call it trans for short, but to them, it was a joke. It was someone playing a trick. So maybe that's why. Maybe that's why they ordered us killed by dogs. Maybe that's why they burned us alive. Maybe that's why they tried to kill everyone that ever saw us as holy. Maybe that's the punchline, because the joke to white supremacy is always murder. It's like when they told us they were bringing us civility on Black and brown soil, but what they meant was that they were bringing us the transatlantic slave trade, because they like to call a thing that it is not. It's like, maybe my name is a platypus. You know, because when I say it, people tell me that's not what it should be. When really my ancestors called for me and I responded back, and they told me there is nothing Blacker than me calling my own name into existence. But to you, maybe it's joking. Maybe that joke is suppression, because supremacy always tries to kill things it doesn't understand. You know, I hear abusers do that sometimes, try to devalue things they don't understand and call things that they are not. So I may call that gaslighting. They may call it law and order. They may call it civility. They may call it a joke or a trick on them, a trick on their science, a trick on their biology, a trick on their power, a trick on their legal system, a trick on their supremacy, a trick on their superiority. But there will always be the platypus. Even when you laugh behind its back, even when you deny its power, it's poison in every step it takes. Underwater, it senses electrical pulses to find its food and the things that it will prey on. It reminds me of myself and the ways that I sense bullshit and decide what kinds of energy I will or will not feed on. Even when you think I'm a joke, that my body is weird and strange, even when you call me a thing I am not. Maybe I'm not a platypus. Maybe I'm just defiant with venom in my walk. Maybe it's just my familiar. Maybe I'm just familiar with the ways white supremacy works. Maybe my familiar teaches me and reminds me to always call a thing exactly what it is, and I call you.
Incredible. Thank you so much, J-Mace. Please show him some love in the chat. I know we can't come off of mute, but I still I feel the presence and I love it. That was such a lovely way to kick us off. I think we'll get started now with our conversation. I'm going to give all of our panelists a minute to introduce themselves, give us a little bit of background on their current involvement in the grant making and funding space, and then also share their artistic practice if they have one. And so, J-Mace, if you don't mind starting us off.
I'm like, as long as I don't have to start first with every question, I'm good.
No worries, no worries.
So yeah, I would say that I'm a cultural worker primarily. And so for me, that manifests as a poet, as a filmmaker, a writer of books and a musical, and I'm the co-director of the Black Trans Prayer Book. In terms of grant making processes, I've worked as a board member, I've been a board member for grant making institutions and organizations. I've been a coach to CEOs of philanthropic serving institutions, and I've been a consultant for arts fellowships and funding programs.
Awesome, thank you so much. Morgan, please.
What's up, everybody? My name is Morgan or Mo. I use any pronouns or Mo. I am coming live from Detroit, code name Midnight on the Underground Railroad, unceded on Anishinaabe territory. Very grateful to be here as a co-director of the Third Wave Fund. Yeah, grateful to be in this space.
Yeah, thank you so much. HD?
Peace, everybody. I'm HD or 100 Day. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm calling in from Anacostia and Piscataway lands outside of DC, Maryland. But I'm from Brooklyn, so also on Lenape territory. And I am a light-skinned Black individual with lavender curly hair and a piece of rose quartz in my ear with a white button-down shirt on today. And I am Black Trans Funds Program Manager. I am a writer, and that's my creative practice. I would say lightly a poet, but I'm not as bad as Jay Mace, so that's my partner over there. And we also partner in our grant making at Black Trans Fund, and I'm happy to be here today. And I'll pass it up to the next person.
Yeah, thank you. Omni, please.
Hey, y'all. I'm still reeling from that blessing, Jay Mace. Thank you. What's good, y'all? Omni Romero. I'm calling y'all from Duwamish land, aka Seattle, up here in the Northwest. I use they and them pronouns. I am the Director of Community Advocacy, Research, and Education at the Pride Foundation, or CARE for short, working all across the Northwest for queer and trans liberation. And I'm synchronizing with HD a little bit. I got a lavender top. Need to get the lavender hair to match, but light-skinned brown, Mexican Salvadoran, with my hair down and a couple crystals popping in and out of the camera. So I'll pass it back.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Well, just a reminder for our attendees, please feel free to make use of the Q&A or the chat feature throughout our conversation. But my first question for the group is, how do you define cultural self-determination, and why is it crucial for trans and queer BIPOC communities? So whoever would like to begin.
I don't mind kicking us off. Yeah, you know, and I hear you, Jay Mace. You're not gonna answer all of them the first time, but I don't mind kicking us off a little bit. So, you know, Jamie, thank you for this question. When you asked us this, the thing that came to mind was, you know, how it is that different foundations do their grant making practices, but also the different ways that our communities show up despite philanthropy, right? Because even though many of us work in philanthropy, I don't think that that is necessarily the basis for how we derive our values. It's just one of the methods we use to try to practice them, right? And so for us at Pride Foundation, right, I mean, we are a trust-based funder. We do general operating support. Those are all those kinds of things that are broad, that do change grant making. But at the end of the day, it really just comes down to being with our people, being in community, being down to like be able to walk down the street and willing to get accosted if that's what it takes, right? So that you're being able to be with your people, and that's part of our work. And that's I'll come back to that. I was talking about that a little bit earlier on with the panelists, something that happened to me, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Omni. Would anyone else like to add?
I'll pop in. This is HD. I think of cultural self-determination. I think about the ways that we also navigate narratives. And so I think for me as a Black individual, I think about the ways that I guess my self-determination is basically how I define myself, right? How we define our terms, how we define our communities, how we also redefine some things that are also out there, right? When I talk about narratives and tropes, it is the way that we also I want to say sort of like claim our culture too. I think a lot of the things that are floating about in the world oftentimes have been birthed by the cultures that we come from, and oftentimes they get stolen from us. And so it's the way that we also reclaim who we fully are together. The piece for me really important too is that we talk about self-determination, but also how we exist, not just only for the view of others, but for ourselves. And so I wanted to just name that.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Morgan or Jay Mace, yeah.
Yeah, I think based off of also just to jump off of what HD said, you know, very much so. Like, so to me, cultural determination, especially on the artist side, is really about thinking about what kind of work can I produce, right? So can I make work that is centering me and my community? Can I make work that presumes and assumes that Black trans people are in the audience? I think that's something that's a lot of times when we do see stuff that is highlighting Black and brown folks, it's like we have to be speaking to other people before we speak to ourselves. And so I think self-determination in that way, and cultural, when we think about that culturally, and is very much about being able to share the history of my folks, be able to tell the jokes of my folks, be able to tell the pains and sorrows of my people to and with my people primarily. And I think as on the grant making side, it's also understanding the conditions under which Black trans people live, right? That so many of us are pushed out of 9-to-5 working and all this other stuff, that art is often sometimes some of the ways in which we're actually able to make sustainable income for ourselves, right? That there's so many different reasons why we show up disproportionately in the arts.
Yeah, thank you. Morgan, did you?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is exactly right. What everybody has said feels really resonant. And the idea really, from the perspective of a funder and an intermediary, is really doubling down on the belief that queer and trans Black people, people of color, are able to govern themselves. And cultural self-determination is about making decisions about the stories we want to tell, the narratives that we want to disseminate, the things that we might want to keep for ourselves. It's about our survival. It's about continuing, oral traditions and practices that we are learning and making and keeping with each other. And I think it's our job as funders to make all the room for that, as much room as we can, and to challenge each other in funding spaces to think more expansively about what we mean when we talk about supporting our folks in the arts, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Morgan. I think that transitions us very nicely actually into our next question, which centers more around like, how do the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality influence your approach to empowerment and advocacy? So Morgan, if you want to kind of expand, I know you just mentioned like, right, really, how do we center ourselves in this work? How do we serve like our communities first and foremost? Do you have any specific examples, maybe more from a funder perspective, right? If folks are not a part of these communities, what does that like level of support and advocacy look like?
Yeah, I feel like those are two really good questions. I think for me, one of the things that's really important is that there is no distance between who I am and my work and the communities that I serve. There's no representational gap that I have to do the work of filling. What I actually have to do is the work of amplifying and reminding funders for whom that may not be their experience, that what they actually need to do is really just pour their resources in, and again, trust that self-determination and trust the fact that we are doing the work that we need to be doing, that we want to be doing, and we need resources to be doing more of, to be doing it more sustainably. I'm really grateful that so much of third wave staff is coming from movement, and we're reckoning with some of the difficulties of what it means to be doing more grassroots and on the ground work, and make that transition into philanthropy and still keep those things that feel really essential and valuable about what it means to prioritize connections, to invest in trust, and to really do case making for our community around us, to think about what it looks like for them to do that too, in dollars, but also in their focus and in where they're pointing their collective direction.
Yeah, thank you so much. Would anyone else like to add?
Can tap in there a little bit and just share that, I think with this, for me, it's really required a certain level of stubbornness, right? Exactly around what Mo is talking about, right? Being stubborn that we actually can govern ourselves and that we will wait if we need to, right? Because, I think of something that Imara from the Translash said, right? That, the right is very willing to wait. They're very patient they're really willing to spend like decades on like their campaigns, right? And, you know, not that I want to organize so much of myself around that, but being willing to, you know, actually be stubborn about what we want. And so at Pride Foundation, one of the things that I'm excited to work on is a fellowship specifically for BIPOC, trans, non-binary, intersex, and two-spirit folks. And, you know, in the Northwest where we work, there are so many stereotypes about our community, right? One, that, you know, there are no BIPOC people in the Northwest, right? Which is, I think, very easy to say, and all that does is abandon those of us who do live up here. Or this other narrative, right, that exists around those of us that are gender expansive, right, that, you know, that's something just for white people. These things that we have been hearing for years and so long, right? And with this fellowship that I run, you know, I've had people say things like, oh, but, you know, what if you just don't have like enough applicants, or like, you know, what if you don't find the people? And, you know, and I have to say, well, we'll wait, you know, well, we'll just wait. It'll be ready when they're ready. Right. And being willing to wait and being willing to like stay ready so that you don't got to get ready. Right. And I think that that's been a part of it. You know, there have been cohorts where we haven't actually had every slot filled because I wanted to make sure that we were getting the folks that we wanted to prioritize. Right. And so being willing to be stubborn and being willing to like not rewrite, but like undo the revisions to history. Like trust-based philanthropy comes from the mutual aid that like Black and brown folks were doing for like generations. And I think all the folks at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project would say that, right? So I don't think there'd be any disagreement there, but being willing to say that, right? That these are things that come from our community. And I think that that's also like what HD was saying, right? That this isn't about other people, it's about what we have within ourselves too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. HD or J Mace, would either of you like to add?
I'll hop in here for a minute. And I'll just say that, like, I think when I heard the question initially, my response was like, I don't know. I think like Mo, I don't separate myself, but I think I also think very deeply about the order of importance in terms of how I show up, right? And that it means that like when I show up in a space, specifically philanthropic spaces, right, that I'm clear on my identity and my proximity because I'm a Black, queer, neurodivine, trans, non-binary, right? Light-skinned, femme-perceived, Scorpio twin parent. And that means that, and also I'm from Brooklyn. And that means that I go hard and I love to love. And my ministry is in honoring who and what is and protecting that at all costs, right? And that means that the last thing is that I'm also in philanthropy. That means that I'm going to go through all those identities first to think about how I show up and interact with people that I'm working with and the folks that I'm asking to do their job, right? And then I'm also really clear about the pieces here where I know that the lineage of my ancestry also is asking me to show up in ways that I'm privileged to in this moment with the seat that I have to, like I said, keep my hand on it, right? Like go hard at it, keep my hand in the draw in some cases too, right? Not just be a nice smiling face, but also to be like, my people have asked for this because they deserve it and y'all stole it in some cases, right? So there's a space of also like reckoning that's coming with how I show up in some of these spaces. There's a space of also for the people who are needing to benefit, not even benefit, needing to be re-resourced. That there's also space of also encouraging those folks not to be disoriented. And when I mean disoriented, I mean that folks oftentimes get swept up in the idea of being resourced by having to only compartmentalize the parts of themselves that is trendy. So the identity piece and also like how the intersections of race and gender and all the other bits come into play with how we make the ask and also how we reconcile what was supposed to be given.
Thank you. J Mace.
Yeah, so I'm thinking going to this idea of like what's trendy or having to do this thing, right? So many different funders want people to have to tell a sob story in order to be, you know, to get funding, as if, you know, we aren't already aware of the conditions, again, that put people in situations where we have to ask for money, right? Or where we have to ask for the resources. So I really like this idea of being resourced. The only other thing I want to add is like, to me, a lot of my advocacy over these last few years has really been about, again, understanding the conditions that we're in. Right now, we're in a place in which people are denying that we are currently in a pandemic, right? And that means that when we have stats like 46% of trans people that have had COVID have had long COVID. And I see people that want me to talk about Blackness or what other people talk about their Blackness, their transness, their queerness, all their intersection, all that stuff. But you want to put me in situations where I might die, right? Or I might lose or I might decrease my quality of life. Like that is not putting me in a situation where in some places it's even okay to take the money, right? Or to even to get the resources from people that are willing to help you lose your life, right? And so for me, a lot of my advocacy has also been creating virtual spaces intentionally that are accessible for folks, to allow artists, to allow creatives, to allow community members the right to return to public space again, right? Because a lot of us have lost access to public space. For those of us, especially that are trans, queer, Black, brown, Indigenous, and disabled and are immunocompromised, we've completely lost the ability to have the stage. And a lot of funders, a lot of organizations are also not necessarily at a places where they're willing to pour into what does it mean to make accessible spaces and virtual spaces for us to be able to actually show up and not expose ourselves, or even demand masking or make it normalized so that people mask in spaces so that we can participate as artists.
And I just wanted to add a little something there too. And thank you for talking about the fact that we're still in a pandemic, Jay Mason. With those numbers that Jamie was sharing at the beginning of the call from Funders for LGBTQ Issues, which shout out to that crew over there doing such incredible work. They just released some of the preliminary numbers from their most recent report, and the numbers have actually gotten worse. So funding has decreased, particularly for LGBTQ plus communities of color. And just something I wanted to pull out from that also is that funding for local work has decreased particularly. Most of the funding now is going to national work. So when James is talking about the right to return to public space, right? I mean, we don't even have funding anymore because folks are getting so caught up with what is called national work, which, there's so much that we could say about whatever that is, right? And I think many times it gets collapsed into electoral funding, but it's not even that. So just the money is also not in the room with us, right?
Yeah, thank you.
One more thing, I'm so sorry. I think the other thing too about, I'm gonna name all of our placements in this too, is that I think that oftentimes too, when we talk about funding being trendy, I think about funding also being really sort of in some ways lightly also about continuing to maintain reformist behaviors and not really leaning into the radicalness of who we are, right? And that when we show up in these spaces, that by nature we're coming in with something that is not necessarily traditional, something that might be, or maybe it is for our own lineages, right? But it may not be following the same indoctrination that came with philanthropy that began with, right? That we're coming with a question, we're coming with the desire to actually want change, that we want to see these things actualized, but by using our own natural and I would say inherent practices, right? So that I think that all of us come with that sort of lens to it. And I think also it has to do with the way that we also maybe disenfranchise a white gaze or a white cis gaze or a white patriarchal gaze, or it also disenfranchises colonizer gaze. Like, it just breaks all of those things down, because a lot of what I think is often filtered through what is funded and resourced is about continuing to maintain a certain condition, like Mace was saying before. But we oftentimes are doing this work to do our very best to undo that, and like I said before, to re-resource and return to what we need to thrive.
Yeah, thank you. Also, don't apologize ever for wanting to chime in. This is y'all's conversation. I did want to uplift. We had a question in the Q&A that I think fits now better if folks are okay with me asking you this a little bit on the spot. But this person says, especially in philanthropy, they're not always receptive to the way we are as queer people of color. Advocate and show up in these spaces, especially when we're countering the white, patriarchal, heteronormative, etc. norms. How do you remain stubborn in your own identity and advocacy in those times?
Yeah, I'm looking for tips too. So that's why I'm here. No, I use the word stubborn, so I'm happy to share a little bit here around this. And I think that some of it comes down to also having your affinity groups, having your people, and being able to actually say, right, who are your people? Having an answer to that question, I think, is going to be key, regardless of wherever you work, right? Who are your people? And we've had some conversations at our own organization, some hard ones, right? Because I don't want to pretend that the organization that I work at is perfect and has achieved all manner of things, because we haven't, right? And we had to ask ourselves, right, is this job our political home, or is it a method that will help us get to our political home? And I think for us, our political home isn't often our workplace. And I think that that's at least the case for me. And so I would say find your political home, be able to name who your people are, and also, have your like everyday de-stressors. Like I have my dog, and like sometimes I might have to go to a break room and, smash some things or something. But, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. My de-stressor is Legos. I don't know if anyone else is a part of the Lego community. Would anyone else like to share some tips or ways that they like essentially just stay in it, stay with it, like especially when you're working within an institution or just right under the guise of capitalism?
I really like what you just said about the job not necessarily being your political home, right? And just using it as a tool. Because I think the reality is, I think even that framing allows us to be able to move people in the ways that we need to move them and not to absorb that emotional stuff. We need places to heal and recover, right? And that might be outside of your job, all that kind of stuff. I think also to this question, I don't know that we have options to like, how do you remain stubborn? Like, again, as an artist, like I also survive off grant funds. Like the reason I'm able to be here and take my time today is because like some of these organizations here gave me some grants so that I can like survive and do things I need to do and pay my light bills and all that kind of stuff, right? And so when I know that I'm able to take care of myself and my community members, like that's the only option is that in my mind is that Black, Brown, Indigenous people, we survive, right? And so I'm gonna take whatever forcefulness I need, any kind of stubbornness I need, I can channel up within me to get that done. And so I always think it can't be about me. It's got to be about what do I need for my folks, and my overall politic overall else, right? Is that Black, Brown, Indigenous people survive, right? And we thrive, all that.
Yeah, I mean, word to that. And also, when I think about stubbornness, I'm pretty new to philanthropy. And so one of the things that I'm very quickly learning is that philanthropy itself is stubborn. And one of the things that, and it's like one of the things that in my initial conversations with folks, they're like, listen, this is about moving boulders, and it's about doing it strategically and in community. And that's word, and that's very important. The other thing that I'm realizing is stubborn about philanthropy is it adherent in, I mean, surprise, surprise, in this like white supremacist narrative we're in, to the simultaneous call to continue to generate data and information. Like what philanthropy is going to do is give you a report. It's going to give you well-researched data. It's going to give you the information that is literally the answer to the question that it is simultaneously asking, which is really connected to why we're seeing the attacks on funding our communities, which is, why is this such a big deal? Why are they always making noise? Why should we focus our energy in this group of people? Why should we focus on what feels like the smallest voices in the room? And I think the stubbornness that I'm kind of leaning into is the insistence on not allowing the clear information of who is being impacted by systems of injustice to the dollar. And I mean, the statistics are impeccable, and we get to carry this kind of like, well, why should we energy through a lot of especially big philanthropies work. There's so much justification that's like almost a waste of time, it feels like, to be able to explain, this is why we need to center and uplift our communities. This is how the most marginalized of us are impacted, and how that reverberates through so many other communities. This is why you should prioritize those of us who have been given the least amount of resources and have been the most victimized by all of these systems, and continuing to make that case, even though it feels obvious. That's kind of where my stubbornness is really living. And it's like, we're not about to sit in these rooms and pretend like we don't understand why we need to really prioritize and center the folks who the folks in this panel are in, of, and committed to. And that is exhausting. It is exhausting work, but it is absolutely essential. Yeah.
I'm gonna hop in and say that I think that my stubbornness comes from also the fact that I feel, like I said before, I feel like there's an inheritance and also lineage that I am moving with, right? And I feel like at the same time, while I'm in these spaces that can be really hard, I squat up. What I mean by that is I try not to be by myself in it, right? And I think that a lot of what we're doing also is like, I think May said earlier about being a cultural organizer, also about like making sure that you're not by yourself doing it, that there are more of the folks that you know you need to roll with are also showing up, that it means that being the loudest voice in the room means also maybe more bodies in the space that also have similar ideas. It means that expanding the folks who are in the conversation to be not only just yours, it means that also you hold them to their values, right? Like I know a lot of orgs love to bust out with their DEI, all the other letters and whatever, but at the same time, if you're saying you do this work and you have a value around it or what it means to you, you pull that back down and tap into it, and right in between the letters and right between the lines, call out what is actually valuable to you, because if they brought you in the space, there's a reason. It's how I see it, right? I also have this thing, this is my own personal thing, where it's like, oftentimes I also feel like in a lot of institutional spaces, there's a sense of like, we're going to bring on more BIPOC people. We're going to bring on more queer people. They like to bring on people to be in spaces to say, we have a person to do this thing and we represent that person by being in the space, but they don't actually listen or honor that person by giving them room to be leaderful. And so it's your job, I think, in some of those spaces to say, well, you put me in this position to do this work and I'm going to see it through, right? 10 toes down. And so that's how I hold my space in that.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so kind of continuing on this theme of stubbornness, right? We talked about what that looks like for all of you on a personal level. But what does empowerment and support look like from grant makers, right? So a lot of our folks in the audience who are not a part of these communities, how can they disrupt like the systems in their current institutions so that they are more affirming, they are actually advocating. I know if we've talked about, right, like people being present, obviously like equity in the space, but I don't know, like if we can unpack that more. May, say you're unmuted. Oh, I think May said froze. Oh, there you're back. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So speaking again, just from the receiving side, so not in the grant making side, the receiving side, I think that funders can make shorter applications. Absolutely, I think that funders can consider again to figure out how to fund. Individuals that aren't necessarily already tied. Finding ways to fund individuals. Finding ways to fund individuals that are not tied to institutions. I think that's another thing. And really just, again, not trying to make people create new projects, right? So I think that's another thing. So one of the things I really value, so for example, like at the Black Trans Fund, one of the things I really value is the Arts Fellowship, right? In which like people get some money to do the thing, but the thing that they're already doing, right? Like you don't have to create 10 other 12 different things. Like we already know that you've been working on this project, you've been doing your thing, or like we want to even create the time for you to rest. So I would love for funders, and I think it's necessary for funders to create stuff and programs in which people do not have to be creating stuff that's tailored to your grant, right? Because we know that a lot of people will create work because they need the funding, and they will see your grant and they will make work based off of your grant and not based off the things that they actually are here on this planet to do. So let them do the thing they were made to do, right? Let them do their dream project, because that, like, there are no movements without artists. There is no forward movement in this world without artists, right? And so we need to honor that and allow artists the space to dream.
I'm going to follow you, Mace, because you shouted it out, and say that, yeah, I think the biggest part of this work that I think about around, I don't know, but I think power is a tricky word too. I think that oftentimes it's also the assumption that like, as the funder, you are holding the most power. And I think that the way that I approach it is I'm humble, because honestly, like if I am looking to invest in the things that I'm amused by, or the things that are amusing to me, then I feel like I should seat myself at the floor and at the foot of those people who are creating, right? And so therefore I need to be led by what they are demonstrating to me, which is how we actually created our fellowship. We sat with what it was that Black trans folks were saying they wanted to see different about the ways that they're being resourced, different in the way that they're being giving fellowships, or given any kind of like liquid or I want to say long-term assets, and also how to better support a longer term commitment to their artwork, right? And so that meant like us making a lot of pivots and being really flexible about how we show up, right? And I think that what May said before about resourcing folks on what they are good at doing or what they already do, but also making room for them if there's a space where they want to actually explore. I think the thing that I'm really most excited about with regards to how we did that did our fellowship was that we made room for 3 different points of entry that folks could come in and try to build on developing their own current work that they needed to kind of like get resources, get time to do, because oftentimes they're being funded for a specific project and they have to leave what they were creating to make it. But instead we said, no, here's the funding so you can do whatever that was and see it through to wherever you want to see it through to, right? Or it was, if you wanted to explore, maybe you are known as being a dancer, but you haven't had the time or the capacity or the wherewithal to say, you know what, I'd like to actually play with clay. Right? I want to figure out how to be a sculpture. I have never had in my entire life the space to do that because I'm worried about funding myself to feed myself and to have shelter. So I'm going to continue to do whatever the commissions are going to ask me to do, but not what I actually dream of creating, right? And then there's the room of also having folks have to have built capacity, right? Some of our folks, are doing this work and are doing it at the expense of their own livelihood and their own selves, right? And so it means that they're pouring out of themselves constantly to show up and be places, paying $12,000 to have an exhibit when they don't have that in their account to show you something. And so what does it mean to instead resource them to be able to be there how they want to be there, right? It also means putting the money up front, right? I think that I had a moment earlier today where I was like, I feel like very often we think about how resourcing works and we know that it's sort of like, I think of a dinner table, right? And that people want to invite folks to the dinner table. They want to invite BIPOC folks to the dinner table. You can come to have a seat at the table, but it's also like when we're invited to the table, are all the chairs going to fit all of us? Right? Did we get enough what we needed before we got there? And if you're also funding us to be at this event, what was given to us beforehand to show up the way we wanted to show up? Y'all already came before that in your luxury homes. You might have come with a lot of resources. You came with the privilege, right? And so you're sitting comfortably. And so in order for me to be there and to create something, I'd have to have the resources beforehand. That means you need to be able to provide them what they need and whatever they've asked for, again, at their foot, honorably and also humbly, so they can show up in their best presentation of themselves. So I'm just saying that that's one of the important things for me also in the space of working and funding with artists and creators.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions from the Q&A. So this person asked to kind of like summarize and reword this. So I'm going to do my best here. But they were wondering how we bring the same unity and fight that people had for gay marriage to trans rights and advocacy around trans rights. They said, where are those people that were fighting for gay marriage now? And where's the funding? We are fighting for our lives alone. I am wondering if it was that the face of gay marriage was white and that the face of trans rights is often Black and brown.
Is that my own initial thoughts, but I want to make sure. I don't want to show it.
Go for it.
Okay. So I think to me, one of the biggest things to recognize, right, is that a lot of cisgender gay people and L people and B people fought for their rights off of being able to assimilate into mainstream white cis able-bodied culture, right? So that trans people have been fighting for their rights in this country ever since colonization started, right? So like that's been a thing on this continent, right? Even the first person that took the government to task around marriage rights, that at least that I'm aware of, if there's other ones, people can let me know. But the earliest one that I've seen, I know many of us seen around that being documented, was Mrs. Lucy Hicks Anderson taking the California courts to task a bit because as a Black trans woman, she was told that her marriage was actually perjuring herself, but and so she had to fight for her own marriage rights, right? When gay marriage stuff was happening, there wasn't all this integration of history, or like even including people that are most impacted, which are people that can't fit in, right, or assimilate into mainstream spaces, right? That for many of us as trans people, we are on the front lines, whether we want to be or not. Many of us want to have mundane lives. I would like to have a mundane life. I want a boring life, okay? I wish that for trans people, that we can have boring lives, right? And so I think a lot of it, especially when we talk about philanthropy, a lot of those gay funding dollars come from using the narratives taken from Black and brown and Indigenous trans people, right? So like you'll hear stats where someone will say this many anti-LGBTQ hate crimes happen, and they will neglect to say that 73% of them are against Black trans women and femmes, right? They will say like all these people are houseless. They will neglect to say all these young people are houseless. They will neglect to say that the majority are Black and brown peoples, right? So I think it is being honest about who are things happening to, in the same way that we're talking about this right now, about the stubbornness, and like we don't have options, right? And there's like, and I think people need to understand where their money comes from, right? And that it is not okay to make fun, to hoard money off of the backs of the disenfranchisement of the most impacted in our communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might also just add to that. I think for me, I don't tend to look back on marriage as the fight to inspire me so much as, you know, just civil rights liberation work from like the 60s to the 90s and like the various waves of organizing there. And I think that that's really where I would draw my inspiration from. And I think that that's also part of it, right? Where the narratives that we have around what even victory looks like, I think is part of what we're trying to transform, right? Because I don't think we should actually look at that time as something to necessarily be super proud of and be like, oh yeah, we accomplished it, because as Jay Mace is saying, it actually didn't happen for trans folks that are trying to get married. And you know, even that aside, those funders are still, you know, they're still around that were involved in that, and they just decided to defund. So I think that comes from a variety of other things that are happening in the sector as well, that funders has been tracking as we've been talking about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So we'll do one more question from the audience, and then we'll like kind of close with our final question here. I just want to be cognizant of time. But this person asks, or they said rather, I've seen a few grant makers implement, quote, no strings attached grants as of recent. What other guidelines do y'all feel are important to include in these opportunities that may increase participation from the TQBIPOC community?
This is
go ahead.
Go.
Sorry, no, we got excited about this one. I'll just say very quickly that actually what HD and Jay Mace were saying, right, and just name it really specifically, move money into individual bank accounts, right? I think that one of the things is that a lot of our people aren't necessarily all at nonprofits, right? And so if your entire model of resourcing our community is dependent on having like a 501c3 that you're going to move money to, then is then going to magically find like all of the folks that's just going to crumble, right? So that's why fellowships, I'm a big fan of fellowships. We have a fellowship that moves money into the individual bank account of that fellow, right? Not going to another organization, right? Because even scholarships go to the university, right? So I think that's just something out there.
This is HD. I wanted to say along with what Omni said, was that like I think a lot of this is about, it's still policing of money, right? Like a lot of it is like, you know, and I think even as many ways that we are radically showing up in our spaces as the people that we are, that there are moments where we have to really figure out how to double down questioning what can be changed, right? What are we doing this because it's tradition or because it actually makes sense, right? Are we doing it because it is tried and true for you, but it's not actually useful for the person who's receiving it, right? And so how do we make alterations around that? I'm happy to say that I am not easy, right? I want to live an easy life. Like Mace said, I want to have an easy life, but I'm not an easy person. So that means for me, it's like, I'm going to keep asking the question, well, how else can we do this? Can we change what's in the grant agreement? Because a lot of times what's written in these agreements is not at all meant for the person receiving the benefit of the resources. A lot of it's protecting the person giving the resources. So think about what you actually are having folks sign, right? Beyond the check that you're sending them, beyond the transmission of money to them, what are you having them sign? Because a lot of that stuff harms them in the end result. You might have funded somebody and feel great, pat yourself on the back for moving 100 grand to a person, but then what they make, right? If they are a Black, Indigenous, POC person, if what they are making in this world right now could criminalize them, could have them killed, right? Could have them not arrive somewhere safe to present it. What are you doing to also ensure that they are able to get there and to get back? What are you doing to also make sure that once that is all done, that they are still safe to continue on to make more things, right? What is beyond that check? How do you resource their safety too? How do you also leave those spaces how do we often leave those spaces and know that these people who write these checks to live lives where they also vote and do things that create harm at a larger level too? Because if you're not actually individually changed by what's going on, then you're not actually invested, right? So the investment that you're making in the art has to also profoundly reverberate through you as a person who's at hand to do this work, to change how you show up in the world, period, right? It also means to me that you, again, take the leadership of the folks who you're funding. And if they're telling you that I need this money to come to me in this way, figure out the best way that you can to make the alterations to make it happen. Because again, in honoring them, right, in honoring their craft, in honoring their lineage of the work that they are creating, before you came with $1 to fundraise or to give to them, they've been doing this. And so out of respect, figure it out. Figure it all the way out. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, word, exactly. And I think adjacent to that is really asking, as foundations, as grant makers, what is the concern? Why does the notion of no strings attached funding give me pause? Is it because I'm worried about how they're going to spend the money? Why? Why? You know, why? Is it because I believe that I need this money to be an investment in a demonstration of something that is actually for me? Is it because I resent the idea that people may be able to, like, I don't know, go have brunch with their friends off of this dollar? So what does this dollar really mean? I think that there's a huge opportunity in this conversation of how we move funding that is asking philanthropy to be responsible for the things that it believes, that it holds true, that it invests in, and that it is stubborn about. And so I think, you know, creating opportunities for our boards, our advisory committees, our staff, ourselves, our comrades in this work, to really ask those questions and let's get to these answers. Let's get to what the real issue is. Because it's not an issue of how we're moving we know how to move budgets around and make budget lines make sense. We know how to fundraise for specific things and explain why we've done it in this particular way. But there's a hinge point here that is the hinge point of trust-based philanthropy. And if we're not really able to investigate what we mean when we articulate our concerns around things like fellowship-based or no strings-based funding, then we're not being honest with the relationship that we have with our grantees, with our community, and the people that we're committed to serving, and the issues that we're committed to funding and supporting. That feels really important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now I want to kind of transition here to our closing question. But I would love to hear, what are your greatest hopes and dreams for the future of trans and queer BIPOC community? Whoever would like to start. And it can be fun and lighthearted. It doesn't have to feel serious, you know, it's not a end all be all question. HD, I think I saw you on mute.
I did it by accident, but I'm happy to go first. I think about the fact that there's so many moments, I think, in the last 2 years for me, particularly, that I've realized that the investments that are being made right now for arts and culture are being made single cellular. They're being made for what's trendy. They're being made for sort of oh, I gave to this thing right now. And I really, really, really want us to acknowledge that Black, trans, BIPOC, queer, that this work, like I said, has been going on forever. And I would love it if we actually centered ourselves understanding that this cultural identity and what we created should be, I don't love the word canonized because it does come from this colonial language, but that it's there's a space that it belongs in our culture that is being neglected. And I would like to see more respect put on it. I'm someone who's raising 2 children, and I want them to not only be learning in school about Picasso and people after they've dead, people that are only out of the, out of Europe, people that are not at all in proximity to themselves. And, I'm blessed and lucky to know that my kids have actually met J. Mace and they know that this person exists and understands their body of work. And that I want that to be part of the future. I want that to be the dream that we all get to have, that we all know that the lineage ahead of us is also able to remember, recite, right, and celebrate the culture that is existing right now as part of who they are, so that we're not asking the question of how do we self-determine. It's already a given. And that's all I'll say on that.
I can tap in here a little bit. Well, one, I want to just ditto everything that HD said. I love that. And, you know, coming from an immigrant family and doing migrant work, I'll also just work in some language from that space, which is, you know, there are these concepts that we use that are the right to remain and the right to migrate, and both are necessary. Right now, in the United States, at least 3% of all trans folks have had to leave their country. And, you know, we're getting emergent data around this. It's hard to track it. Erin in the morning has been tracking some of this, but that's like thousands and thousands of folks that have had to flee their state, right? Internal displacement. So I'm thinking about the right to remain wherever you are. So many of the people in the Northwest are fleeing here, and that's contributing to the stereotypes around why it's allegedly not full of any, that it doesn't have any BIPOC folks, right? And so the right to remain, the right to migrate if necessary. And I want to echo what Jamie said, the right to be bored. Honestly, I mean, I was sharing with folks, I was walking my dog this morning and literally got accosted on the street because I was wearing purple, and somebody was like coming for me, just being like, oh, you're gonna take my children or something. And mind you, they didn't have any children with them. They're just yelling at me. And, you know, I want to be boring sometimes. I think that that's also a part of it, right, as well. So I think that that's what I'll add in there.
Damn, I didn't hear you share that earlier, and I'm really sorry that that happened. And and just naming that exactly. I mean, my biggest hopes and dreams are like, I don't know, universal basic income for us all, and free healthcare, and, you know, access to reproductive wellness and justice, and for our disabled folks to feel just demarginalized, for I don't know, for all of the ways that we are not being named as we're in the statistics of folks who are suffering, to be lifted up, and for those folks especially to be given all of the resources that we need. I think when I think about philanthropy and what that means, right now we have a rapid response, our Mobilized Power Fund, that we're only able to fund 30% of. And so many of the folks that we're saying no to are BIPOC artists, are organizers, are folks who are both making the way in terms of actions and resistance and survival, but also making it like sweeter and making it like mirrored an experience that allows us to feel like we exist in the world because of their creativity, because of their passion and their vision, and because they've been doing this work. So I guess from the angle that I'm holding, to be able to more robustly fund our folks and our work, to be able to do it without having to figure out where we're gonna have to say no. And that is the biggest dream for me in the context of this conversation. And boredom, I second that. Give me boredom, give me early retirement, give me no debt, give me, you know, like, yeah, all that. A nap.
That's an idea. For me, I'm thinking about yeah, I said this actually at the GIA conference, and I want to say this again because I know somewhere out there, someone can make this happen, or someone can make this happen. I want there to be sabbaticals for our folks, right? So I want our folks to, again, like go into this place of, and because I think even when people get funded to take like a week or 2 weeks or something like that, it's like there's so much trauma happening right now in the world. So even the fact that we can't walk our dogs in peace, the fact that we can't even walk our dogs in peace, right, is wild, right? And so something that allows people to actually settle into rest, that right now in this country and in the world, we are being worn out intentionally, right? That there are people working really hard to come at us at all sides to make us feel exhausted. And so when we think about a world free from oppression, it takes time to imagine and envision, which requires rest. And so I want us to be able to have those sabbaticals, you know, and be able to lower our blood pressure, you know, sit with community, have boring days by the beach or something like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, Jay Mace, HD, Morgan, Omni, and also Ali for your technical support today. Thank you everyone who joined us. I know it's a very busy time. A lot of folks are out, and so we really appreciate you being here. I just wanted to end real quick by saying the work of grantmakers in the arts is not merely about allocating resources, it's about reshaping the very fabric of grant-making systems ingrained in racial capitalism. In closing, today's webinar has shed light on the critical need for cultural self-determination and empowerment of trans and queer BIPOC voices. This discussion underscores the importance of creating space where these communities can thrive and fostering environments that respect and affirm their identities and cultural expressions. GIA's commitment to identifying, interrupting, and transforming traditional grant-making practices serves as a catalyst for change, urging us all to support and contribute to collective liberation in our pursuit of a more equitable and inclusive future. We encourage you to provide us with feedback on your experience today through the survey link that Ali will be dropping in the chat, and also through the QR code that is now up on the screen. All webinar registrants will also receive a follow-up email with that link and also a recording of today's webinar. And thank you again. We hope you can join us for our next webinar, Invisible Weavers, Charting the Evolving Identity of Intermediary Organizations, on Tuesday, July 16th. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.